Light weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This is week 34. How should we meet our tests? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Last week, we considered Satan's temptation of Jesus in the wilderness after his baptism by John. We discussed the question, does Satan exist? All of us experience temptation of one kind or another in our lives, some of us frequently, others only occasionally. Whether temptation comes to us from our own subconscious or from outside ourselves is secondary to the fact that it does come and that we must deal with it. More important then is the question how to deal with it. In fact, how to deal with tests of any kind. Martin Luther flung an ink pot at the devil who had appeared to test him. A dark stain on the wall of Luther's cell is pointed out to tourists in support of this story. Unfortunately, our trials are not often so summarily dismissed. As a fellow monk once said to Swami Kriyananda, speaking of Satan, if only I could get my hands on him. Jesus, during his temptations in the wilderness, overcame them and thereby set an example for all time by clinging the more determinedly to God. As Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, darkness cannot be driven out of a room with a stick. Once you turn on the light, however, the darkness will vanish as though it had never been. Jesus manifested this principle. The Bible tells us, therefore, that at last the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. In the Bhagavad Gita, the point is clarified further by the added explanation that there are three qualities in human nature: sattvic, or spiritually elevating, rajasic, or ego activating, and tamasic, or spiritually darkening. It is this triune aspect of human nature that the third chapter refers to with the words, as fire is hidden by smoke, as a mirror is dulled by rust, and as an embryo is enclosed in the womb, so is the indwelling self enveloped by desire. Yogananda explained that each of these examples describes one of the qualities or gunas. Sattva guna, that which elevates our consciousness, can be freed of any identity with ego by a little puff of meditation and right affirmation. Rajoguna, which embroils the ego in restless activity, can be worked off with a little more and a little longer effort. Tamoguna, embracing as it does such mental states as laziness and stupidity, can only be outgrown in time, since it inhibits even the desire for self-improvement. The example Jesus gave us was intended more for those in whom sattva guna is predominant. But if you yourself find elements in your consciousness that resist even the effort to cling to God in prayer and meditation, don't despair. Patience, as it has been well said, is the fastest path to God. As long as your efforts take you steadfastly in the right direction, you will come out right in time. Remember Yogananda's words, a saint is a sinner who never gave up. If, however, your nature impels you, even against your will, to move in the wrong direction toward egoic desires and away from God, strive at least to detach yourself mentally from your wrong actions, which are induced by habit. The time will come when their own stored up energy will tire and diminish. At that time, if you have not contributed to that energy by your consenting will, you will find it possible at last to redirect your energies more constructively. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om Om. Om.
Thank you, Melissa. Let's hope. Now I have two devices going. Let's hope one of them remains going here. I apologize again. So this morning, let's begin our talk with this reading from Whispers from Eternity. I demand to return home. It's number 42. Impediments beware. Flee my path. I am homeward bound. Through the corridors of time, falling in the pitfalls of error, lifted by thine unseen hand, I walked. Discouraging darkness, barbed fences of habit, stone embankments of indolence, mountains of indifference, oceans of unfaithfulness, sirens of sense may stand in my path to prevent my march to thy place. But a million kingdoms and sextillions of years of untrammeled worldly happiness will not tempt me to forsake thee. So, how should we meet our tests? Well, we certainly are being tested these days. I mean, with everything from war and climate change and famine and in the world, certainly quite an exciting time to be alive, very entertaining, I guess you could say. And for ourselves, I was going to say I've actually had some physical issues, and so one thing I can say is how not to meet your tests, and that is by wallowing in self-pity and getting angry at God and feeling sorry for yourself and feeling hopeless and discouraged. And we have those moments. I have to admit, I've had a couple of those moments recently, and they go fast, they go by fast, but when you're in them, it's no fun. It's like wallowing in, in the depths of mud or quicksand, because it can pull you in very quickly. So we have to remember, we just have to keep turning to the light. That beautiful reference to from last week's reading, and how Jesus met his tests with Satan. And you can't beat out the darkness with a stick. That's the song that Ram sung last week, and I would have sung it this week too, but we just heard it. It's a wonderful sentiment. We have to turn on the light. So we have to remember to turn to the light, and it's really difficult sometimes when we're in the thick of it. And thankfully, we have so many gifts. We have so many tools. We have divine friends who can help us and get through these times, because we're all going to go through them. I mean, that's the nature of life. That's why we're here. Master said that life is a test to find out if you will choose God or if you want the things of the world that he's given you. And so, life is a school, and we in school we have our lessons and we have our tests, and we just keep trying. We might get an F on that Latin exam in 9th grade because we couldn't relate to learning a dead language. I do remember. So I just kind of blew off Latin right from the start. It's like, what is the point? Now that I'm in Italy, actually, I'm like, wow, that's a Latin word. And I wish that I paid more attention. But anyway, we have our moments of failure, and we just have to keep picking ourselves up. and again, choosing light over darkness. And the more challenges we have, I mean, we should be welcoming them. And that's what finally got me out of my funk. I thought, oh, I'm working off some good karma here. And so it's a gift from Divine Mother to work off our karma. And the more challenges and the more tests that we have, when we hit that bottom, it's like, we just want God more, like, please lift us up. And so that is the purpose, is to help, as Master said in that quote, is to find out if we'll choose God or if we'll choose a lower path. And the most important thing for overcoming our tests is attunement, and remembering what an amazing, we have these masters, and what a team. We don't just have one master, we have 5 masters and Swamiji. And we are so blessed. So I have a story to tell. A good friend of mine at Ananda Village, when he first arrived there, he had a pretty rough first year. He had a breakup with a girlfriend, and he couldn't find a job, and he was getting pretty discouraged. And so one satsang with Swamiji, he walked in and he admitted he was kind of in a funk. He was in like a dark cloud. And he sat in the back, and he kind of sat in from the aisle a little bit. He didn't want to bring attention to himself. And so Swami spoke, and as Swami spoke, he could feel himself just letting go and relaxing more, and not feeling this intense discouragement, and his energy shifted. And this is the beautiful thing. As Swamiji walked down the aisle out of the temple, and he was just walking, and then he suddenly looked over at my friend, who was in a few places from the aisle, and said, "That's the spirit." And everyone kind of turned and looked, and was like congratulating him, and they didn't know the history. But the history was that he was feeling this, just despair and great sadness and darkness and hopelessness. And then his energy shifted, and Master could see his heart. Master said, "I watch your heart." And so Master could see his heart. He could feel that he was really trying. And we know that Swamiji was so in tune with Master that, as he's walking down the aisle, he didn't know why, but for some reason he was drawn to turn to my friend and say, that's the spirit. And so it's beautiful to see how these things work. We cannot underestimate the magic, really, that happens for us when we get into trouble. So it's very important to have patience and to not despair. As it says in the reading, a saint is a sinner who never gave up. And there's another quote that I want to read from there, if I can find it. Okay. So strive, hold on a second. Okay, well, I can't find it very easily, so I'll just do the shortened version. Strive at least to detach yourself mentally from your wrong actions, which are induced by habit. The time will come when their own stored up energy will tire and diminish. So never give up hope. Never say, that's it, I'm finished. Because there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Lord, when in darkness, Lord, in confusion, always I'll follow thee. If I grieve and lose my way, thou wilt comfort me. So that's a promise. And another quality that is very important in this subject and in life in general is calmness. Because if we get agitated inside or depressed, discouraged, then it blocks out the inspiration. I mean, if we are able to kind of take a deep breath and breathe and do our techniques, we have so many techniques that can help with anxiety and stress and fear. And then we have that deep, deep well spring of calmness inside us. It's there, we can access it. And well, here's a beautiful story. Jyotish and Davy are here in Assisi, and Jyotish told this story last week, and I'd forgotten it. I hadn't forgotten it, but he told it in a lot more detail than I had remembered him saying before. So basically, at the beginning of Ananda, this is in maybe 1967, and we know that Jyotish first met Swamiji in San Francisco, and he tells that story how he had heard his cousin or something. They knew that there was a devotee of Yogananda who lived nearby, so they managed to find him, knocked on his door, and Swamiji said, "Oh, I'm working in a project. Would you like to join me?" And as Jyotish says, I just didn't know that was going to be the rest of my life, but of course he said yes. And then he shortly became Jyotish's right-hand man. And after Swami bought the land, which is now the meditation retreat in outside of Nevada City, there's the farm that was purchased afterwards, and that became Ananda Village. But 6 miles up the road is still the Ananda Meditation Retreat, which is where it all started. And so they would go up on weekends, and I love imagining Jyotish and Swamiji riding up in a funky old used car up to Ananda and throwing their sleeping bags on the ground. There was nothing there. They just slept outside under the stars, and what a simple life. And I mean, so Swamiji was maybe in his early 40s. I can't remember. Can't do the math right now, but he was a young man with a lot of energy and vigor and determination, as he always was. But so they were building a temple, and they were building a geodesic dome, and nobody really knew how to do it, but they were doing the best they could. And actually, this is the first of, I think, 3 meditation domes up at their retreat, because as you'll see in this story, they kept falling down or burning up or something. But so in this case, it was the very first one. There was nothing else there, and they had managed to get all the the pieces up, and it was just the connecting pieces at the very top. And if you know a geodesic dome, it's quite a beautiful geometric sphere, and it has 5-sided pieces and maybe 3-sided pieces, and they all fit together like a puzzle so that it creates a dome, a globe. This is the Buckminster Fuller design. And so they'd gotten all the pieces up, and they're right at the top, and there was just like one more thing to connect. And before they could connect it, the whole thing tumbled down. And so all of their hard work was just lying in pieces on the ground. And so they went to sleep that night. And Jyotish kind of makes fun of himself, because he was trained as a psychologist. And he tells this story that's really cute. He says, where it's early in the morning and he's about 6 feet from Swamiji. They're just lying on the ground sleeping. And he awoke to hear some Swamiji talking to himself. And Jyotish said to himself, oh, well, I'm sure he's just processing this whole thing with the dome. And, you know, so that was a big disappointment to put all this energy and time and money into it and then have to fall down. And so, of course, you know, the psychologist is talking. I'm sure he's just processing it, but he also was very curious. So he wanted to hear how Swamiji was processing it. So he kind of, you know, peeled his ears, and what he heard astounded him, and it cemented in him his conviction that these teachings, I don't think he had any doubts, but this was just another great example. And Swamiji was talking softly to him and to himself and saying, oh joy, oh joy, oh joy. And Jyotish he's feeling joy when, instead of discouragement. And so I just love that image. Swamiji was a great example to us. He had so many tests. He had, of course, the spiritual tests that he had, and everything with Yogananda's organization being kicked out of that, and then the lawsuits and his health. He had many health problems, and you know, there's a story of a doctor he'd go in to see a doctor, and the doctor would say, well, how are you? And he'd say, oh, I'm fine. And then the doctor would list off all of the maladies that Swamiji had, but you know, he didn't relate to it. He didn't identify with that, because just like in the Whispers reading, see, yeah. Well, that's okay. I can't really find what I was going to reference, but it he just didn't allow himself to indulge in self-pity. Now, I have heard that, you know, it was obviously very discouraging to be let go in his guru's organization when he'd given his whole life, and he was a vice president, and he was building the work in India, and it was swept away from him. But of course, where would we all be if that hadn't happened? So it's really an interesting story. What an amazing story. And he every day is an inspiration because of his attitude, his right attitude, choosing light and not darkness. Attunement, such great attunement with Master. And we have everything available to us to be living that same life, to be making those same choices. And I think the most important thing is not to get discouraged when we don't live up to our expectations. I mean, the bar is set high, and you know, we're shooting for that, but you know, we're not making it all the time. And if we're down on ourselves for that, for our failures, for not passing our tests in the most perfect way, then that creates this cycle that becomes, you know, just a downward spiral until it's used up all of its energy, as it says in, well, I can't find it again, so that's okay. Maybe it was in the reading that Kelly read. But the most important thing is just to every day try to align ourselves with the divine in whatever way works best for us, whether it's through deep meditation or yoga, music, visualizations, affirmations. I'll tell another story of another dear friend at Ananda Village who was diagnosed with AIDS, and she was given a year and a half to live. And she got discouraged many times because of what a, there was no cure for it at that time, and she was doing everything she could. And at one point she asked Swamiji, I just sometimes feel like, okay, maybe this is the time, maybe I'm just supposed to let go and go. She was young, she was in her 40s. And Swamiji said, no, don't give up, because this lifetime that you've been given is a great gift. And so don't give up on it, because the fact that, you are already deeply on the spiritual path, deeply committed to a life of service and attunement with God and Guru, doesn't always come easily. So he encouraged her to do everything that she could, to live as long as she could. She lived for 10 years, and a lot of that was she made it a priority that she had every morning. She spent 3 hours in not just meditation, but visualizations, affirmations, and chanting, and artwork, everything, and of course deep meditation and prayer. But the fact that she went from a prognosis of a year and a half to 10 years is really phenomenal, and it's also a testament to our teachings and how many great tools we have. So I like to think of I was a carpenter for a few years before I moved to Ananda. Actually, I was always a carpenter even after Ananda. I just didn't get out there on the job site. But so a tool belt, you have the leather tool belts, and they have a hammer and the tape measure and the screwdriver and the nails and all these things. So we have our tool belts, and we have meditation, and we have visualization and affirmations and chanting and energization and pranayama and yoga and service and the study of wisdom, so many books that are inspiring. And so if you can even do a little practice of this religion, you will find great freedom. And whether we all make it to final liberation in this lifetime or not, that is not the issue. We just keep putting one step in front of the other, and don't give up. Be patient. Patient endurance attaineth to all. And choose light, choose love, choose kindness and peace, and God will do the rest. We'll have our offering.